Hello, welcome to my third episode of PHL Crime Journals. Today's case is about Gary Heidnik, a mentally disturbed murderer. Please like, comment, and subscribe, and watch this video until the end to see a video of one of the victims talking about the whole ordeal.
I'm sitting there, trying to figure out what the hell to do, what the to do, I started chopping up the body.
Gary Heidnik was born on November 22nd, 1943 in Eastlake, Ohio. His parents are Michael and Ellen Heidnik. Gary Heidnik also had a little brother named Terry. Gary Heidnik's parents got a divorce in 1946. Gary and his younger brother were raised by their mother for 4 years before being sent away to live with their father and his new wife. Gary Heidnik was reportedly abused mentally and physically by his father. Gary would later claim he suffered a lifelong problem of bedwetting. Gary also claimed his father would try to humiliate him by making him hang his stained sheets from his bedroom window in full view for all his neighbors to see. At school, Gary did not socialize with the other students and refused to make eye contact with any of them. One of the students recalled asking Gary, and I quote, "Did you get your homework done, Gary?" end quote. Gary responded by yelling at her and telling her she is not worthy enough to speak to him. Gary also used to get teased for his oddly shaped head. His younger brother Terry claimed it was the result of Gary falling out of a tree and hitting his head. Despite everything, Gary excelled academically and tested with an IQ of 148. With the encouragement of his father, at 14, Gary enrolled in military school in Virginia for 2 years, ultimately dropping out right before graduation. After enrolling back into public school, he dropped out and joined the United States Army when he was 17. Gary served a total of 13 months in the United States Army. During basic training, his drill sergeant graded him as excellent. Gary applied to several specialist positions, including the military police, but was rejected. Ultimately, Gary was sent to San Antonio, Texas to be trained as a medic. Gary did really well through medic training. However, he ended up getting sent to Germany. He was sent to the 46th Army Surgical Hospital in West Germany. Gary earned his GED while serving. Fast forward to August 1962. Gary began complaining about severe headaches, dizziness, blurred vision, and nausea. A hospital neurologist noted Gary displayed signs of mental illness, which he was prescribed medication for. In October 1962, Gary was transferred to a military hospital in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, where he was ultimately honorably discharged from the military. Shortly after Gary was discharged from the military, he became a licensed practical nurse and enrolled at the University of Pennsylvania, only to drop out after 1 semester. Gary worked at a Veterans Administration hospital in Coatesville, Pennsylvania, but was later fired for poor attendance and for being very rude to the patients. From 1962 to 1987, Gary was always in and out of mental institutions. Gary attempted suicide 13 times. His mother had been diagnosed with bone cancer and was suffering the effects of alcoholism. Ultimately, Gary's mother committed suicide by drinking mercury chloride. In October 1971, Gary started/incorporated a church called the United Church of Ministers of God. Gary opened a bank account in the church name and started out with an initial deposit of $1,500 and managed to grow his following. Along with the large following came more money. Gary amassed over $500,000, which is equivalent to $2.7 million in 2023. Gary met his future wife through a religious dating service. Her name is Betty. They exchanged letters back and forth for 2 years before she moved from the Philippines to the United States with Gary in September 1985. They got married the following month on October 3rd. Their marriage started to fall apart when Betty caught Gary in the bed with multiple women. Gary would force his wife to watch him have sex with other women. Betty accused Gary of physically abusing her and raping her repeatedly. With the help of the Philippine community in Philadelphia, she managed to leave Gary. In January 1986, after leaving Gary, Betty realized she was pregnant. Gary did not know about their kid until Betty put Gary on child support. On September 15, 1986, Betty gave birth to a healthy baby boy who she named Jesse. Gary also had a kid with Gail Linkow. They had a son named Gary Jr. However, the baby was placed in foster care immediately after birth. Gary had one last kid with Anjanette Davison, who was illiterate and mentally disabled. Anjanette and Gary had a daughter named Maxine, who was born in March 1978. She was also placed in foster care immediately after birth. In 1976, Gary was charged with aggravated assault and carrying an unlicensed pistol after shooting a tenant of a house he was renting out. One of the bullets grazed the face of one of the tenants. Fast forward to 1978, Gary went to Penn Township Mental Institution and signed out his ex-girlfriend Anjanette Davison, mentally disabled sister, then took her to his house where he locked her in a storage room in his basement. She was later found and taken to a hospital where it was revealed that she had been raped, sodomized, and she contracted gonorrhea. Gary was arrested and charged and convicted of kidnapping, rape, and false imprisonment. The original sentence for those charges were unfortunately overturned after Gary appealed the conviction. Gary spent 3 years of his incarceration in a mental institution. He was released in 1983 under the supervision of a state-sanctioned mental health program. On November 25, 1986, Gary abducted a woman named Josephine Rivera. Josephine was a prostitute. Gary lured her to his house on 3520 North Marshall Street in North Philadelphia with a promise of money for sex. However, while Josephine was getting her clothes back on, Gary came up from behind and choked her till she started going in and out of consciousness. Then he dragged Josephine down to the basement and shackled her arms and legs together with chains and sealed the bolt-in with super glue. Gary then viciously beat her with a stick until she stopped screaming for help. Then he threw her into a pit he made in his basement. Gary boarded it up and sealed her in. She was repeatedly taken out to be beaten and raped. Over the next 3 months, Gary kidnapped 5 more women. They were all chained up, beaten, and thrown into the homemade pit in his basement. The women only left the pit to be beaten, raped, or tortured. Gary made Josephine in charge of the other woman. He'd bring Josephine hot chocolate, hot dogs, and let her sleep outside the pit. However, Gary made it clear if she disobeyed him, she would lose all her privileges and would be treated like the other women. Gary used this tactic to prevent them from teaming up against him. Gary made Josephine help him torture the other woman. Josephine recalled in an interview of a situation where Gary filled the pit with water and attached a strip extension cord to the other woman's chains that were used to help keep them in place in the pit. Gary would force Josephine to electrocute them using the strip wire cord, placing it against their metal chains. Here's a video of Josephine talking about that particular situation.
He used to fill the hole up with water and take electrical wire. Well, like a plug that you plug in, he would take the two wires, and then he would take the wire while they were in the water and put it on their chains. And in the beginning, Deborah was howling, and then she didn't howl anymore, and he thought something was wrong with the wire. I said, look down there in that hole and see what's wrong with that girl. I said, because she keeps saying Deborah dead, that she laying face down in the water. So he finally lifts up the board, and he says, yeah, she is laying face down in the water. And he's like, picks her up like by her hair, back of her head and something. He's like, yeah, he's right, she's dead. And now he's like, now all my troubles are over with. Now I can get back to having a peaceful basement. I, Josephine Rivera, and Gary Heidnik, electrocuted Deborah Dudley at 3520 North Marshall Street on whatever day it was. I can't remember. It might have been, she was freed on 25th. Might have been like the 21st of March, 1987, by applying electricity to her chains while sitting in a pool of water. Anytime that you're cut off from the world outside, and whoever's holding you captive, the same person after a period of time, you're going to grow to like him regardless, because he's your only contact to things that are outside.
The electric was so intense, Deborah Dudley was electrocuted to death. After that, Sandra Lindsay was the mentally disabled woman Gary lured to his house shortly after kidnapping Josephine. Lindsay couldn't take the abuse as well as the others, so Gary put her on punishment and starved her for a few days. When Gary tried to give her food after starving her for a few days, she wasn't moving nor responding. Gary had Sandra chained to the ceiling. Gary then proceeded to unchain her. After he unchained her, she fell back and hit her head against the basement concrete floor. Realizing Sandra died, the other woman started crying and panicking at the sight of their dead friend. Gary immediately told them to cut it out or they would die next. Gary then dragged Sandra's body upstairs, then he cut her into pieces. He cooked her ribs in the oven and boiled her head on the stove and put her arms and legs in the freezer. Neighbors kept calling police to report a foul odor coming from Gary's house. However, when police did show up to his house, he claimed he burned a pig roast. Gary would use Josephine to help him lure women to his house. He always kept Josephine by his side. Josephine was allowed out the basement frequently, which was ultimately Gary's downfall because on March 24th, 1987, after helping Gary abduct a seventh victim, Josephine managed to convince Gary to let her go see her family for a few minutes. Gary agreed and drove Josephine to the gas station near her family home. Gary told her he'll be parked and waiting. Josephine got out of the car and walked around the corner. Once she got out of Gary's sight, she then ran to the nearest phone and called 911. Officers immediately responded and arrested Gary on the spot. After 4 months of imprisonment and torture, the women were finally free. At Gary's arraignment, he claimed that the women were already in the house when he moved in. On July 1st, 1988, Gary was convicted of 2 counts of first-degree murder, 6 counts of kidnapping, 5 counts of rape, 4 counts of aggravated assault, and 2 counts of involuntary deviant sexual intercourse. Gary was sentenced to death and incarcerated at Pittsburgh State Correctional Institution. In January 1989, Gary attempted suicide by trying to overdose using prescribed medications. Gary's last meal was 2 slices of cheese pizza and black coffee. Gary was executed by lethal injection on July 6, 1999, at the State Correctional Institution at Rockville. His body was cremated. As of 2022, Gary was the last person to be executed by the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. Stay tuned for bonus clips. Thank you everyone for watching. Please leave a like, comment, and subscribe. Now I will play the bonus clips. Stay tuned.
Would make them shut up to stop hollering.
You had a progressive kind of infliction of pain on these women.
I was trying to find something that would make them behave.
But it was painful to them.
I hope so.
He took me to his house. We went upstairs and we had sex. And afterwards, I was getting dressed and he came up behind me and started choking me. And he started choking me. But all I can remember was, I don't know, I guess it happened so fast, all I can remember was like a film projector of things that were going on in my life was like, just flipping back.